Hello, welcome everybody. First official episode of Learn with Flo in my new office space. So happy July, everybody. July to me is a big month because we're booting off a brand new chapter in the lowdown as we are officially in private practice mode, right? So if you've been following me a while, you know that I've always kind of, like I said, had my Lowdown LLC. I've had it established and have always kind of committed myself and partnered with other practitioners, other practices, which has been such an amazing learning experience for me. And I'm now excited to officially be in private practice for myself. So send all of your great entrepreneurial vibes my way because I'm going to need them. But I have had just like an overwhelming amount of support from everybody in this community and, you know, in my private client community. And so I'm just forever grateful for that. So for everybody that sent me, like I said, a private message, well wishes, or even just virtual well wishes from afar, I felt all of them. And so I just appreciate that so much. So without further ado, kicking off my new office space and Learn with Flo, let's continue our foundational lab series as we really dive into blood sugar balance today, right? So a couple weeks ago, I started this series because I felt like there's always questions and curiosities about what do I ask for at the doctor when I'm going in to draw labs, or I'm going in and I'm feeling like crap and, you know, my labs always come back just normal and come back next year. Like, what do I look for, right? So I really wanted to dive into kind of a deep dive into some foundational blood work series because a lot of us start our lab journey with blood work. With my private patients, I also end up usually running like other functional diagnostic testing, obviously, whether it's microbiome testing, food sensitivity testing, adrenal testing, more in-depth hormone analysis, detoxification factors, all of those types of things, right? But we can see so much in blood work, and especially if we know how to look at blood work from a more functional lens, either what we're actually ordering or even taking the standard blood work that maybe your doctor ordered and maybe their reference ranges are looking different than like a functional reference range. So you're starting to hear me speak about some of these common labs that we get drawn, but looking at them through a different lens or a completely functional lens can absolutely 100% change the interpretation and change recommendations and change your action plan, right? So I'm not saying that, like I said, everybody's labs are abnormal, but there's a lot of times where I'll see labs that were run by a different practitioner and I'm like, what was the feedback from these labs? And they're like, oh, nothing. They said everything was great. Come back next year. And that's just because maybe according to those labs reference ranges, things didn't flag like high or low. And so the, practitioner is just kind of looking down the list and it's like, is anything out of range? Nope. Okay. See you again next year. I'm like, no, like what are the functional ranges for some of these things? Even well before they flag like high or low from a diagnostic standpoint, they could very well be contributing to like a functional issue and contributing to somebody's very real symptoms and affecting their quality of life. So we're going to continue our Know Your Number series as really kind of like a behind the scenes sneak peek into how I begin all of my patient treatment journeys, which is with a comprehensive functional wellness consult. And as part of that consult, we order lab work first. So that way you'll have like an actual comprehensive blood work panel, what I would consider a comprehensive blood work panel. Not just like, oh, we did a CBC and a blood cell count and a glucose and a lipid panel and like your TSH levels. I'm like, no, that's not like a comprehensive blood panel. Like that's going to tell us like hardly anything, right? So we start with like a comprehensive blood work panel, including thyroid function, hormone balance, blood sugar, immune system regulation, all sorts of different things that are going to give us a good starting point to then be able to couple that with the patient's lived experience, right? We're collecting health history, we're collecting medical symptoms, we're really using our investigative skills to start to use these series of different clues, right? Labs are clues, your lived experience and your symptoms are clues, your health and family history are all clues. I use all of those things to help determine like what's the best course of treatment to really help understand how all of these things are connected and get to the root. What's the source of the issue, not just covering up your symptoms with Band-Aid medications or like a comeback next year kind of approach, right? So I said it last week, I'll say it again. I truly believe that you do not need a PhD to understand your body or even interpret your own labs, right? You just don't, right? This is your body. You have full freedom and autonomy to feel educated and empowered to know what the heck you're looking at and to ask questions and to get answers to those questions and inquiries as well too. So today we're going to continue our series. If you missed kind of the first couple parts of our series, we talked about cholesterol panels and lipid panels last week. So you can always go back and listen to that as well too, just to take a look at and make sure like, are your numbers actually within optimal ranges? Or maybe there's some clues there that you weren't privy to, right? Today, we're going to dive into another side of our foundational blood work panel, which is blood sugar balance. Arguably one of my favorite places to look, because I think blood sugar is very, very misunderstood, because all we're ever looking for is diabetes. Right? And it's like, is that the only reason why we're looking at blood sugar? We're going to miss a whole chunk of individuals that are struggling with obvious blood sugar dysregulation, and they're getting pushed off, sloughed off, and they're kind of getting this mindset of like, oh, you're not a type 2 diabetic, so like come back next year. And it's like, so are we just going to really sit and wait until someone is a full-blown type 2 diabetic when we can see, like I can see like decades in advance of where this train is headed, and we're just going to continue to let this person head towards type 2 diabetes and not treat it until it's full-blown diabetes? I'm like, I think different, right? I know that blood sugar is something that affects every single system. It's a very big component to overall inflammation, very big component to overall stress in the body, and there's not one single system or organ in the body that's not impacted by blood sugar, right? Why is that, right? Blood sugar is a very, very tightly controlled metabolic process because it's going to determine the steady and appropriate stream and supply of energy, right? And probably for the most part, a lot of people come to me and one of the key symptoms that they talk about is fatigue, right? It's like, I'm always so fatigued. I'm exhausted all the time. I wake up fatigued. I go to bed fatigued. I crash in the middle of the afternoon. All of that is like, what the heck is going on with blood sugar at those certain times of the day, right? This process should be very, very tightly regulated by the body because it's important, right? It's like if you don't have tightly regulated blood sugar, either blood sugars are going to swing too high, which then is very, it makes things in the bloodstream really sticky, right? It's like we don't want a bunch of sugar rolling around, but blood sugar lows are also a very cause of alarm in the body, right? So it's very tightly controlled. There's multiple hormones that are involved in this scenario. So I just want to give you guys kind of just quick high level anatomy view. Then we'll kind of talk about like, what should you ask for when it comes to blood sugar panels? How do we interpret someone's blood sugar panel? So several hormones are going to be required in this. Specifically hormones like insulin is going to be required in blood sugar regulation. Cortisol is going to be big, and a hormone called glucagon as well too, right? So let's kind of break this down a little bit. The first really like endocrine organ or gland that we're going to be talking about is the pancreas, right? You hear about the pancreas a lot. It's notoriously involved in blood sugar regulation. It plays a major, major role. In times where blood sugar is high, usually because blood sugar is high because we've eaten or ingested carbohydrates or foods that have broken down into sugar in the bloodstream, which is good. We want that, right? It's not bad. Don't let someone vilify like your blood sugar rising after a meal. I'm like, yeah, that's normal. That should happen. If it didn't, I would be concerned, right? But in responses to like blood sugar that swings too high, those beta cells of the pancreas release insulin, and insulin's job is then to push glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cells for energy, right? The body's like, hey, I can't have this sugar sticking up the situation out here. I'm going to shuttle it into the cells. Hey, cell, can you turn that into energy then? And they're like, yep, got it. You give me the glucose, I'll turn it into energy. Insulin's like, great, here you go, right? So that's insulin's job. In times of low blood sugar, right? In response to low blood sugar, the pancreas then releases from the alpha cells of the pancreas a hormone called glucagon. And glucagon's job is to stimulate mainly the liver to release just a little bit of stored glucose so that you don't like pass out, faint, or die, right? Sounds dire. I just am extremist. So we think about the pancreas, the beta cells of the pancreas releasing insulin to help lower blood sugar, and the alpha cells of the pancreas releasing glucagon to help raise blood sugar. Very, very tightly regulated. The whole body is involved here, right? I will also say that there's another endocrine gland called the adrenal glands that are also very much involved in blood sugar balance as well too, especially in response to things that are like non-dietary, right? So the pancreas is like, I got the diet covered, but what about times of stress? Right? When stress is high, the adrenal glands actually release cortisol, which is a stress or our steroid hormone, and that increases your blood sugar, right? Mainly because the body is like dumping stored glucose that's found in the muscle tissue, right? So I don't know if you guys have ever like seen this in real time. Some people wear like those like continuous glucose monitors, right, on their arm, and there's an app that can scan them, and you can see in real time somebody's like, I didn't even eat anything. Why did my blood sugar go up to 130? And it's like, oh, I was in a stressful meeting. I was taking a stressful phone call. I got bad news. I was road raging in traffic. Whatever it was, it's like your blood sugar will go up in response to stress. And it's like, but I didn't even eat anything. I'm like, I know, that's a healthy response. The body just doesn't know the difference between like a dog chasing you and needing to jump out of danger or like an angry email from a boss. Your body is going to respond with the same glucose response, right? Because the body like has evolutionarily evolved thinking that stress means you got to move, right? There's a threat, you got to get out of the way, you got to run. Whereas in today's world, we meet a lot of stresses that don't cause us to like run, right? So this is where, yes, you will start to hear more of this, mark my words, a whole new category of diabetes that is called stress-induced diabetes. I see it all of the time. They're getting thrown in the same exact bucket as type 2 diabetes, and it's not the same. Right? So mark my words, stress-induced diabetes is a thing. And I think that will be something we hear about more and more. The last kind of piece of the puzzle that plays a major role in blood sugar balance is also going to be your muscle, right? Muscle is a glucose sponge, right? It will suck glucose out of the bloodstream even without insulin being present, right? So this is so powerful for us to know because the more muscle you have on your frame, the better you regulate your glucose, right? You're more insulin sensitive. This is why we also have a recommendation for people that struggle with blood sugar to walk frequently, especially after meals, and to engage in consistent exercise. So there was actually one study that found that walking for 20 minutes after a meal lowered your blood sugar by 50 milligrams per deciliter. That's huge. Like that is 50 milligrams of glucose that that insulin did not have to take care of, right? That is massive because as we start to dig into this, you guys will start to put two and two together that the more that we can regulate our blood sugar without insulin or cortisol or glucagon, like we don't need these extreme hormones that save us from these extremes, the better you're going to be. Right? When I work with individuals and clients and we're working through nutrition and lifestyle and supplemental interventions, I'm trying to get them off of the extremes. I'm not trying to say like, the lower the blood sugar, the better. I'm like, no, I don't want extreme low blood sugars, but I also don't want extreme high blood sugars. We need to learn how to regulate this in the middle so that your body does not secrete massive amounts of these rescue hormones to try to save you because you're probably not going to be stoked about the consequences of that, right? We're going to develop insulin resistance. We're going to start to store body fat. We're going to struggle with energy. All of those things is why we have such an epidemic of people struggling with blood sugar dysregulation. Right? Because we're not understanding that it's such a total body approach and it's not just go keto. That is not what will fix our blood sugar epidemic, right? So just know that I think from a conventional medicine standpoint, we are a little bit late to the party per usual, when it comes to treating and recognizing blood sugar dysregulation. There's actually a spectrum of blood sugar dysregulation. I will make sure that in my stories today, I post this past post, but there's a post that I've made on my Instagram page talking all about blood sugar dysregulation, and I show this slide that talks about the progression here. So ironically enough, some of the first stages of blood sugar dysregulation are low blood sugars, or what we call hypoglycemia, right? So a lot of people will find that they like eat a meal and they crash, or they actually experience symptoms of hypoglycemia, headaches, fatigue, needing to nap, feeling shaky, lightheaded, lethargic, right? Hypoglycemic episodes are the first stage of like full-blown type 2 diabetes, which is so opposite because we put people in an opposite category. And I'm like, this is someone that's like displaying early signs, like you don't do something now and we're progressing through full-blown insulin resistance patterns, right? So we have to catch it early. So I'm always looking out for signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia in individuals. If we don't correct hypoglycemia, eventually the body will start to develop more insulin resistance patterns, right? Unaddressed hypoglycemia will progress to like insulin receptor insensitivity, and the cells stop responding to insulin. That's no good. We don't want that, right? Then we end up with full-blown metabolic syndrome where now our triglycerides are getting involved, our cholesterol is getting involved, our blood pressure is getting involved. We're storing visceral fat like crazy. And then finally we get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So I'm letting you guys in on the fact that like this is very much like a disease spectrum where we start with hypoglycemic symptoms, which there are so many people out that run around hypoglycemic and they don't even know what they're feeling, right? And then they don't do anything about it. So now they have insulin resistance and then metabolic syndrome and then type 2 diabetes. We're not intervening from a conventional medicine standpoint until someone is full-blown type 2 diabetic. I'm like, whoa, wait a second. Like, why weren't we catching this in its hypoglycemic state? When someone's coming to you saying like, my hormones suck, my libido sucks, I have no energy whatsoever, my gut health is a mess, my skin's breaking out, whatever it is, I'm like, oh, that was your chance to start to really dig into like, is there a blood sugar component to how that individual is feeling and experiencing on a daily basis, right? Nope, ship shape, see you again next year. And these poor individuals are trying to manage it, like I said, through Band-Aid approaches, Band-Aid diets, and they're not really getting any better, right? So know that there's a full spectrum, know that there's multiple glands involved, know that there's multiple organ systems involved here because the body knows how freaking important blood sugar balance is, right? So when we think about what I would call the lowdown method for interpreting blood sugar labs, we know that the functional medicine approach is going to vastly differ from the conventional medicine model because the conventional medicine is a little bit more geared right now or equipped, like all they're equipped with are more reactive measures. They're going to wait until your blood sugar reaches a specific threshold before they even initiate any sort of treatment strategy. Whereas I'm more focused on like early detection, personalized interventions, and really helping empower individuals with like a holistic approach so that they can start to recognize, oh, these are signs and symptoms that I experience every day of blood sugar issues. I just didn't know it. I'm like, yeah, exactly. So we can kind of correct and get ahead of it so that we're not like waiting till it gets so bad that we need like aggressive pharmaceutical interventions in the future, right? So if you're curious about blood sugar labs, some of the big key things that we want to look at are going to be fasting glucose levels, hemoglobin A1C, and fasting insulin are going to be kind of the main three. Now there's going to be some extras that I'll talk about as well too, but let's just dive into these first main ones because there's a lot to unpack here. So fasting glucose levels are going to be the standard marker for blood sugar, right? They are right under that first line where someone draws glucose on your labs. That is your fasting blood sugar. Although this is kind of one of the gold standards for looking at blood sugar regulation, I will tell you that like deviations in your fasting blood sugar are usually the last thing that starts to change before somebody has issues, right? So if we're relying on this marker to like, oh, we're just going to wait until your fasting blood sugar is above 100 to do anything about it, I'm like, yo, that's going to take decades of someone having dysfunctional blood sugar for that to start to get out of range. Why? Because the body tightly controls it, right? So the systems are going to have some like serious system breakdown for those fasting blood sugar numbers to start to rise. When those fasting blood sugar numbers start to rise, we know that this has been going on for quite a while, right? So that fasting blood sugar marker usually measures after a good 12-hour overnight fast. So you're drawing that first thing in the morning, not eating or drinking anything. Optimal. I'm always looking at optimal. Optimal fasting blood sugar should be between 70 and 90. You'll even see some practitioners that say 70 to 85, which is, like I said, we're getting specific, but 70 to 90 in a fasted state would be more optimal regulation. First or early alert range is 90 to 100. I can't tell you how many people come in and fasting lab work is like 95, 96, 97. And it's like, oh yeah, like this is the time where we start to have some conversations about it, right? And they're like, oh, my doctor always said my blood sugar looks great. I'm like, yeah, that's because they're going to wait for it to get like 100, 110, 120 before they do anything about it. I'm starting to see that it's in this early detection range. So we're going to do something about it now before you're full on into that type 2 diabetes progression, right? Pre-diabetes is anything considered above 100, right? So that's kind of the marker or the cutoff point that most lab reference ranges are going to use. So you might think like, oh yeah, my blood sugars are normal. And maybe they've been trending 92, 94, 96, 97, 98, like over the past 5 or 6 years that you've had them drawn. It's like, are we just waiting? Are we just going to sit here and wait until it's above 100 and then we're going to talk about it? I'm like, no. Like if it's in that first alert range, 90 to 100, let's start to have some conversations, right? So that's your fasting blood sugar. Second one that most practitioners, I would say, are running as well too is a hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin A1C sometimes is abbreviated HB. A1C on your lab. So if you're ever looking for that one, it might be abbreviated HbA1c. Hemoglobin A1C is actually a little bit of a more informative metric sometimes because it's a 90-day average. So instead of just looking at like, what was my blood sugar that specific day at that specific time, like what's my 90-day average of blood sugars? It averages your highest highs and your lowest lows and gives us an average. So I like hemoglobin A1C because it tells me like a little bit more of a standing metric versus just a one-time reading in the morning. Now, hemoglobin A1C is actually measuring the percentage of your red blood cells that are saturated with glucose molecules. So how many sugar molecules are stuck to your red blood cells? How sticky are your red blood cells, essentially, right? So when we look at this, it's reflected as a percentage because it's a percentage of how many red blood cells and how glycated they are, how much sugar is stuck to them. So when I think about optimal hemoglobin A1C, 5 to 5.4%. That's kind of the optimal reference range that I'm looking for there. I don't want too low. Right? This is something, again, you'll hear me talk about all the time. I'll see people come in and like, well, my doctor said my blood sugars were great. And their hemoglobin A1C is like 4.7, 4.8. And they're talking about how crappy they feel and how fatigued they are and how much brain fog they have. I'm like, your blood sugars are low. Do you struggle with hypoglycemia? Do you have hypoglycemic symptoms? So sometimes it's kind of like celebrated or you get like this extra like pat on the back. I'm like, oh my gosh, your hemoglobin A1C is 4.7. I'm like, oh my gosh, don't you feel like garbage? So I like to think like 5.0 to 5.4. So I don't want it too low. I also don't want it too high, right? So early alert range here is going to be anywhere from like that 5.5 to 5.7%. Anything above 5.7, 5.8 is considered more in that pre-diabetic range, right? So again, we're looking for like not too high, not too low, Goldilocks zone just right to see like how well is the body tightly regulating that overall blood sugar markers. very last one that we'll talk about mostly here is going to be a marker that most practitioners do not draw, I'm not going to lie, and that is going to be your fasting insulin level. I think it's getting more and more mainstream. I pray that it gets more mainstream, but if you have not had your fasting insulin level drawn, please request it at your next doctor appointment or come to me and I'll draw it for you. But your fasting insulin level is going to be very, very informative here of what our trend on that spectrum is, right? Your fasting insulin is going to be one of the first markers that starts to elevate when there's blood sugar regulation issues going on. So the fasting insulin is something that we can catch much, much earlier. The recent statistics say up to 10 years. So fasting insulin can catch a progression of pre-diabetes to type 2 diabetes up to 10 years before an individual would get a formal diagnosis. So if I can see something that's like looking into the future 10 years and say, hey, if you keep doing what you're doing, in approximately 5 to 10 years, you'll have diabetes. It's like, I would do something about it now, right? We're going to catch it before it becomes a full-blown problem. So definitely one of my more favorite proactive markers that I'm drawing for patients, because a lot of people just haven't had it drawn before either. So high levels of insulin do suggest insulin resistance because the pancreas is having to pump out more and more insulin in response to the same blood sugar levels, right? So we don't want the pancreas having to pump out more insulin. That's what's causing individuals to, like I said, have more belly fat, have visceral fat, more fatigue. Insulin patterns are very, very important, right? Standard reference ranges will say anything under 25 is normal for fasting insulin. I say no. I'm looking for fasting insulin to stay between about 2 and 10, ideally between like 2 and 7 are going to be fantastic. I don't want your fasting insulin too low. Sometimes, again, that alerts me to like, is there an autoimmune component going on here? Are we having some like pancreatic issues? So I don't want it too low either. So fasting insulin 2 to 10, 2 to 7, even ideal. But if you've had a fasting insulin drawn and it was like 15, 16, 17, 20, and it was like, oh yeah, ship shape, come back next year. It's like, no, we need to get ahead of this like now, right? Other markers that I really use for blood sugar regulation too, these are more indirect markers and you have to kind of, like I said, know what you're looking at. I look at individuals' mineral status a lot. Minerals are going to be your things like sodium, potassium, magnesium, selenium, copper, zinc, right? All of these trace minerals, those are very, very impactful in terms of overall glucose regulation. So mineral depletions are big in blood sugar balance as well too. So if someone's depleted in a lot of those minerals, I can see that there's some active blood sugar issues going on, or at least a potential for blood sugar issues going on. And then outside of some blood work labs, other things that I'm definitely going to be looking for is in the microbiome. I see so often where individuals have like gut overgrowths, especially yeast or fungal or mycotoxin overgrowths, and their blood sugars are all over the map, right? So sometimes it's due to partly some of these systemic infections as well too. Which kind of brings us to, okay, now that we understand this about blood sugar dysregulation, like, shouldn't our goal be to like nip it at the source of it versus just waiting for us to treat the symptom down the road when it's full-blown diabetes? Yes, I completely agree with you. So how do we do that? From my methodology, of course, we're going to start from a nutritional standpoint. So nutrition, it has to be our first step. It's not our only step because there's a lot of people that are eating in a way that should support blood sugar balance, but they're not achieving blood sugar balance. And so we need to kind of dig into what other factors are at play here. So nutrition, though, we're definitely going to be talking about things like meal timing. Don't let somebody tell you like, oh, as long as I hit my calories in a day, or as long as I follow paleo or keto, like I should be good. No, circadian rhythm is a thing. There are other hormones at play. So we have to think about meal timing. We have to be thinking about protein. We have to be thinking about fiber. We have to be understanding something called the food matrix, which just goes into how food is processed and prepared that affects its overall glycemic index, right? So these are all things like that food forward nutrition plan when it comes to blood sugar stability. That is my Master Your Metabolism Masterclass. If you have not gone through my Master Your Metabolism Masterclass, go sign up now, right? I say that out of love because there's so much power and teaching in that can help like completely rock your world and how you think and view about nutrition, and can be a very, very necessary first step. If you've completed the Master Your Metabolism Masterclass, or you are eating in a blood sugar balanced way and we determine that, the other things I start to dig into are going to be lifestyle related, right? Dehydration. I know it's so stupid and simple and like a low-hanging fruit, but dehydration is a real thing. We do kind of become a camel when we're dehydrated. Our liver actually starts to secrete fructose into the bloodstream to cause us to retain water. Wow, what a novel idea. It's like, we're dehydrated. Don't lose water, turn into a camel and store it. So dehydration's real, right? We also think about like exercise, right? If someone has a very sedentary lifestyle, they're not getting to utilize their muscle as a glucose sponge. We always have to be thinking about stress, right? We talked about the regulation of cortisol and how cortisol in and of itself, irregardless of food, how much stress can play, mental, physical, emotional stress can play a role in blood sugar. Sleep, it's a huge one. Sleep deprivation is probably one of the main causes of insulin resistance. We see a very tight correlation between sleep apnea and insulin resistance, right? So we know that sleep is a factor even well beyond food. Caffeine and alcohol can also impact blood sugar regulation as well. And then once we kind of get through a lot of, like I said, the nutrition, the lifestyle kind of factors, some individuals do require us to dig a little deeper. Maybe that's some unresolved infections. Maybe there's some candida or yeast or fungal overgrowths. Maybe there's some mycotoxin exposure going on in the picture. Maybe there's some toxin burden. Maybe there's a leaky gut and some dysbiosis, allergies, food sensitivities. Like, I've seen people eat foods that they're sensitive to and have a bigger blood sugar response than they should, right? And that's probably likely due to more of like that leaky gut pattern that's going on in the gut. So we need to figure out like, what are those triggers? Why is that? Remove it, heal and seal that leaky gut, and we can resolve a lot of those issues as well too. So don't think, like I said, that there can't be some bridge solutions. Like, I work with individuals all the time that are like on blood sugar lowering medications, right? And it's like, that's fine. I just want everyone to know, like, those are not addressing any of these issues. They're just addressing the symptoms. So let's use those, let's put those on board, but let's also now start to do the real work. Like, cool, someone gave you a Band-Aid solution, that's great, and they sent you out the door, see you again next year, but like, what are you actually going to do to fix it? Or were you empowered with education and knowledge on how to fix it, right? That's where I'm passionate about. So I like to use, even in lieu of pharmaceuticals, there's lots of nutraceutical supplemental products that can be really impactful here. Love using things as simple as fiber. Love using short chain fatty acids, inositol, even like your chromium, cinnamon, berberine. There's lots of different nutraceutical products that can be helpful as a bridge solution. None of those things fix it on its own. Like, it's like, we're going to put these in and then we're going to do the real work, right? So out of all of that, just know that from a blood sugar standpoint, there's a lot more that can be dove into and kind of addressed in that pattern too. So hopefully this was helpful for you. If you are, like I said, with this functional interpretation of lab results series, just having your mind blown, and you're curious about getting your own labs, you can always sign up for your own functional wellness consult with me. You can click on the link in my bio and find the path to schedule a consultation there. You'll be able to purchase that. We'll get labs ordered for you and all of that fun facts. So if that's of interest to you, you can always find that link in my bio. But otherwise, hopefully these conversations are being helpful for you guys. Dig back to your old labs, see what you find, and let me know, like I said, if you guys have any questions. But we'll be back next week for another round. So happy July, happy Monday, and I hope everyone has a great week.